Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. Okay, so we're at a stage where we've got a ring and pinion and a differential and everything rotates nice and smooth. We've got A-arms and we've got a sway bar in place. So I'm just going to go along the bottom here and give these a last tighten. Everything is good. Okay, so now it is on to bag number 3. I'll be putting in the control blocks here for either side. I'll be starting to, it's basically just putting in axles. Yep, nothing, no control arm, upper control arm yet, just doing left and right axles and some, looks like there's some setup parts. And we'll get into that as I go. So I'm going to open the bag, I'm going to cut any pieces off trees, I'm going to look over things in the directions, kind of get a feel for what we're doing, and video will start up in a moment. Okay, one of the many adjustable parts on this car. Right off the bat, you've got 2 different possible wheelbases because the arms have 2 holes here, so you can make the wheelbase wider or narrower just by changing that location. You can also adjust the height because the pin for these parts right here has an insert, and depending on whether that insert is this direction or this direction, will determine whether it's in or out, and that can widen even more or narrow a bit. And then you can also choose whether that's a mid position. So you have these positions here. So this is all the possible scenarios you have. Wide and narrow is the 2 pin locations for the this pin right here. Okay, and then you have these inserts. Now the LH is here and here. It can either be low or high, and in this scenario it can be wide outwards or high. So it can be in low or in high or out high or out low. Out and low, wider and lower is the default setup, and you also have these mid pieces as well that you can adjust with as well. And again, depending on which direction they're facing is going to change. So you have a lot of options as far as the overall positioning. This is also an area where one of the items that I upgraded to from that build sheet, the racer's build sheet. I'm going to be using a different set of wheel hubs. Get these pins out of here. Oh, they're kind of stuck in there. Just drop that in there. Okay. Get these 2 pins out. Now the pins that are with this are the same as the ones that come with the kit, so I've already got a set, but now I've got extras. So I'm just going to drop those in there. The difference is that these hexes are a little wider. The standard hex that comes with the kit is a 0 millimeter for the rear and there's a 1 millimeter for the front. The build that that racer settled on was 1 millimeter front and 1 millimeter rear. So when I ordered the kit, I ordered a pair of 1 millimeter hexes. As you can see, they are 1 millimeter wider, so that's going to also widen the rear track. And I believe I discussed this in an earlier video. Back in my go-kart racing days, that was one of the main things you could do to change the handling on a go-kart, was moving spacers on the front wheel hubs to move the front wheels in or out, and likewise you could adjust the position of the rear hubs on the solid rear axle by basically turning a big grub screw and sliding it along on a key, and dramatically change the amount of oversteer or understeer, or go from oversteer to understeer, just by a slight widening or lowering. It was really impressive when I started doing any testing and seeing that just a subtle change. You know, you're driving the kart for the first time and the rear end keeps wanting to pass you into every turn, and you come back in and you narrow in the rear a bit and pop the front out a little bit and go down the track and go into that net first turn, and it's a totally different animal. So anyway, getting these 1 millimeters and trying them and noticing how that feel changes for you is something you may want to experiment with. You might even want to get either a 1.5 or a 2 if they make the 1.5s. I think they make a 2. It doesn't even necessarily, I don't think, have to be from the same manufacturer. It's a standard 17-inch hex. So you could probably scavenge these from other manufacturers as well as aftermarket manufacturers, which there are plenty of. For example, the springs that I'm going to be using are from a company called Ride, and they are not a manufacturer of cars. They just make certain components. So, just kind of going over that. Another adjustment is the position left and right. You can see that even with those spacers in, or these inserts, you're still going to have some room here. That's what these little plastic washers are for. They're just spacers, and you're going to use a certain number of them, either in front or behind, or a combination of front and back to get the position that you want. And that effectively is lengthening the wheelbase or shortening the wheelbase, depending on how many spacers you're using. So that is another thing that also will change the way the car handles. So for these, we're going to be running them. Let me just look at this again. So we're going to be running them to the outside and low. So that's this one here. See, if I used this, there's like a mirror. Each one has a mirror of itself, and there's pairs. So if I were to put this one to the inside, it's going to be high and inside. Okay, if I switch it around this way, it's low but to the outside, or inside, excuse me. In any event, you're getting an opposite effect. So basically, it goes from here to here if you switch these around 180 degrees. So this one, it goes on the opposite side, and so now we have a matching hole location. And as you can see again, that there's space here that needs to be filled. Now you could have all the washers here, moving the rear wheels further back or all the way to the front, shortening that wheelbase, which will make the car handle faster or turn quicker, but it's gonna make it more twitchy. So there's, again, as I discussed in an earlier video on this setup, that there's different things to try to get different effects. Some things are going to give you what you want, but it's going to bring some other handling effect along with it that you may not want. Like you could change 3 different things and basically end up in the same spot that you were, or you could make it dramatically worse depending on what you did. So handling is something that I'm going to try to cover in a good bit of detail. I'm going to show you a lot of different tools for tuning and setup. One of the tools I recently picked up, this is something I've been wanting for a long time, and finally got one. It is a set of corner weights, and again, this went back to the go-kart days, that you'd take the cart to a guy who did tuning, and he would basically put 4 scales on the ground and put the cart on it and weigh each corner, and you basically want the weight to equal left and right, and then you want a certain balance front to rear, a certain ratio, like let's say 52% of the weight in the rear and 48% in the front. And that's just, I'm just throwing out a number to give you an understanding of what that does. But at the same time, you want equal left and right. So you put your RC car on these 4 scales and center them up under the tires, and you get all the readings here on these little screens. And so then let's say you've got a light left front wheel. You can adjust the amount of spring tension on the shocks to balance the car back out again, so that you have the right, left and right. Because if, let's say you've got a stiff left wheel, left front, and a stiff right rear, your car is basically going to have most of the weight on the 2 diagonal tires. So the car is going to want to rock like that. When you take a left-hand turn, you're going to get one kind of handling. When you take a right-hand turn, you're going to get a completely different handling effect. And that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. And this is a nice little tool for setting that stuff up. They are, of course, not inexpensive. It is about, it's made by Sky RC. It's a corner weight car balancing scale system is what it's called. The part number is 410-15-175. You can find it on Amazon. The price varies, as all things do in a free market. Usually it's a little over $100, like between $105 and $115 is the various price range I've seen it. I saw it at one point a little below, like $98, and I wish I'd bought it then, but not a huge difference in price. It's I didn't have the money at the time, and this time I did, so now I have one. And I've got some other tools that I'll show you, such as a shock matching tool, which kind of you mount a pair of shocks on it, like left front and right front, and without springs, and that way you can see what the if you've got the oil adjusted correctly. Basically has like a teeter-totter at the top, and you put the 2 shocks, one on either side, and run it up and down, and you can see if it's staying level or if it's canting to one side or the other. You need to change the shock oil in one of them, or bleed it properly. Anyway, many different things that impact handling. These cars are incredibly complex. So I'm going to go ahead and start getting this stuff together. Let's see. So this is, I need to make the opposite. So I need this one. Wait a minute. These. Okay, so I need low outer and again there. So now we have mirror set up, and that's what you want. So now these pieces here I'm not going to need for the time being, at least until at some point I decide to tinker with that area of the car's handling. And at some point I'd really love to have the time to just set up, go to a track, or set up a little test track in a parking lot somewhere one weekend, and just tinker with different things and see what happens. Like, play with all these different settings. You know, first drive a bunch of laps, you know, figure out the track, get consistent, and, you know, and then mess with different settings and see how they impact the handling if you change something. Because there are, as you can see, there's so many adjustable parts. So we're just working on the rear here. We're not even done. There's still many, many more. We've got, you know, inner and outer locations, high, low, middle, you know, outer. We've got, you know, various toe settings. We've got various anti-squat settings. You know, there's different sway bars to tinker with. And then there's the differential, the high, medium, high, and low settings for the differential and how that's going to impact. As well as the carbon versus plastic, and, you know, some versus none on the arm plates. So many things to adjust and tinker with. So I'm going to go ahead and pause recording while I start getting some of this stuff together, and as I come across things in the build that you need to know, I will demonstrate those. I don't want to have you watch every twist of every wrench, otherwise these videos will be many hours long. So I'm going to move forward with these dog bones and the CV joints, and we'll see how it goes. I'm working on the rear suspension still. This is the rear upright, and I've put in the pieces I want. Now, things were a little snug, and when you're working with these are a 3.5 millimeter. This is a 3.5 millimeter reamer, like the 4 millimeter reamer I used on the inner pins. When you're working with a setup like this, you want to loosen the widest point. That way, if there's any slack, you're going to get the least amount of deviation. So if you do it here at this point, not only do you need to do it to each of these blocks, and there's a bunch of them, if you take out a little too much plastic and you get any rocking going, it's going to be far more pronounced on a narrow section than on the wide section. So I reamed out not only the forward holes or the outer holes that I'm going to be using, but I also did the inner holes, because if I decide to make a change at the track and see how things handle, I don't want to have to try to go through that reaming process after the fact when the car is completely together. Much easier to do it at this point. And as you will see, I'm going to go ahead and just run this through without any spacers. As you can see, it's still stiff on here. If I hold the pin, this upright doesn't move. But now it moves freely, and if I try to jiggle it, there's no play. So that's how you want to do that kind of thing. And they are a little stiff. The inner ones, for some reason, were considerably stiffer at both sides. That may just be a molding issue. Not that it's any kind of flaw or anything, it's just a little more material. So when you ream these out, make sure to, you know, get them so that they are free moving, because again, this is extremely essential. If you have anything that's sticky, and the more sticky things you have, the more that adds up to the suspension not moving freely, and you'll never be able to balance the car. You'll never get accurate tweak. It'll always be an issue. And so make sure you get yourself some of these. They can be hard to find. In the absence of these, if you, like, say you're about to build your car and you've gone to every internet vendor you can find looking for a 3.5 millimeter reamer. I believe I got this one off of Amazon, as a matter of fact. I was kind of in a pinch. I was in the middle of building a kit. It's worth waiting to get one in. If they are unavailable anywhere and you don't know where to get them, I recommend going to Amazon and getting a metric set of drill bits. Do not try to skate by with a set of standard American style, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, 3/16, and pick the closest one. You will make a mess of these and they'll be unusable. Get a metric set of bits and be very, very slow and careful as you enlarge the holes. Make just a couple of rotations. If you can use a hand drill, even better. But if you've got to use a power drill, make sure that it's something with a variable speed so you can just run a few times around and then literally just a couple of revolutions at a time. Slide the pin in, test it, see how it's moving, and go at it in slow increments, and that way you at least stand a chance of getting a decent result without wrecking your arms. But if they're stiff, if they're locking up like the way this is, where if I push this pin through here and this aluminum piece can stand outright to the side, if you can do that here on the arm, you're not going to have a viable vehicle. It is going to be a problem. It's not going to handle well. It's going to be totally inconsistent, and you're never going to be able to figure out what's wrong. No amount of changing and tuning and adjusting is ever going to work, because this issue is always going to complicate things, and it's always going to be giving mixed signals. So you'll make one change you think is going to help, and it's not going to give you what you want. Trust me on this. This is absolutely essential. If you ever buy an almost ready to run kit, this is one of those things you should take the thing apart and check for. I remember a friend of mine had an ARF, and he was having all kinds of issues. He was really frustrated with it, and the first thing I did was pull the body, pull the wheels, take off the shocks, and see what the suspension was doing. And when I lifted it up, it just sat there straight up like that, like it was saluting. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. So we took the car apart, we reamed out all the holes, we got the suspension working nice and fluid, put it back together, and it was a whole other vehicle. So trust me on this. This is not something you want to skip. A couple of these tools and doing this process on a $100 car can make it perform better than a $500 car that hasn't had that done to it. So I've taken care of that at both ends. Now it's time to continue with the assembly. Give me 1 second to check the setup on the washers I'm going to need over here, and I'll continue on with the process. Okay, one already bolted on, and going for number 2. Doing the spacers in the stock setup. It looks like that's the same thing that's going on with the other setup. Got a few questions about this. I may need to call tech support at Serpent and get some answers. The way the settings go for the rear there is 0, 2.55, 1.25, and 3.75. And I'm assuming they're talking a combination of these spacers, either some in front and some behind, all in front, all behind, assorted combinations of those to position the upright and get the wheelbase you want. The thing is those are, nice round numbers like 5 and 2.5. Unfortunately, when you take a caliper to these plastic spacers, we get 2.31 for the largest spacer, and the two smaller spacers, at least these two, because I checked the other side as well, these come out to 1.07 and 1.13. Now that's not really going to give you any of those combinations back there, at least not exactly. So number 1, I'm probably going to upgrade to some aluminum spacers, and number 2, I'm going to give them a call and kind of get an explanation of what that part of the spec sheet means exactly. And there's a couple other things I've seen on the spec sheet that didn't quite mesh with the kit. Again, it may just be my not understanding how they discuss things or describe things. When I get clarity on all that information, all that will be folded into the tuning section, because that's where it really becomes relevant. So for now, I'm going to put the 2 smaller spacers in front and get in my upright, and then the single 2.3 spacer at the rear. And it's a 5.5 wrench for the nut that goes on the back of the shaft here. Just get that started by hand. And this, the threading stops ahead of the back of this. So number one, it's a lock nut, so you don't have to tighten it down horrendously. Number two, you don't want to collapse this and have it, you know, squeeze. But the shaft is long enough, at least the solid part, the unthreaded portion, is long enough that it's it leaves a little bit of play when you come up against the end of the threads. So just tighten it to the end of the threads. You don't need to crank it down because of the lock, the nylon lock nut there, and then you're all set. And as you can see, it moves nice and smooth. So those two are done. So let's see, we are on to, I need to back up a little bit here a step and go to 13.1 and put these constant velocity joints together, or CVs as they are referred to, and get the hubs taken care of. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to throw one together, make sure I familiarize myself with things, and then I'll go through that with you step by step on the second one. Nothing like watching Fast and Furious while you build a car. Okay, got one done. Pull the parts I need. Now, surprisingly enough, they really don't talk about grease and where you should be putting it. I've built a lot of CVs over the years, and you definitely need to grease these suckers up. So anyway, the first step is putting this seal over here, and you want to be careful. You don't want to rip this, so you need to kind of just slide it over top, basically kind of turning it inside out, and then work it over that ball on the end, okay? And so it should look like this, okay? So the next thing you want to do is you're going to take this little barrel and the shorter of the two pins. So we have this pin for the outer hub for the wheel hex, and you want to put some grease in here, and don't worry about putting too much in because you've got that nice dust seal, and you really want to be liberal with this. And then, just for good measure, put some on here and just kind of smooth it on with your fingers. You don't want any dry spots on this when this is all together, because this is going to be rotating and changing angles at very high speeds, hundreds of thousands of times. Okay, position it so the hole in the barrel is straight up and down, perpendicular to the shaft. And then set that down for a minute. Okay, then you want to take the basically like the axle shaft here, or however you want to describe it. I haven't looked up the name, and they don't exactly put the part names out here. And you want to fill this cup, you know, I mean like fill it to the rim, but you want to put a nice layer of grease all around in there, because this ball is going to rotate in there, and every time the suspension moves, it's going to be changing angle. That's why they call it a CV, a constant velocity joint. Anyway, slide this in. There's 4 holes. Doesn't matter which one you put it through. Just get the ball in there, and then get the pin started down through there, and put a finger below it, because otherwise the pin can just drop through on you. Okay? And slide it through, and now the pin is sticking out either side here. So it's right at the surface, and that will be held in place by this plastic ring, and partially also by the dust seal. Now slide the dust seal down. Make sure you've got a good amount of grease in there, and it's pretty much over everything. You might even want to squeeze in a little bit more, because again, the dust seal is going to contain any grease that might spatter around, and it's also going to keep dust and grime from mixing with that grease. So slide the dust seal down from the base at the axle here until you can just put it over the edge here. So if you okay, let me just, if you look, there's these 2 edges here. You want the dust seal, the outer edge of the dust seal, to drop into this groove like that. Then just wipe off any grease you might have gotten on the outside. Okay, now take this plastic ring, and with the it's like a cap, so the part that overhangs the edge out here, you want that to go over the edge of this rubber seal. Just kind of snap it on. Okay, now fold down your upright and drop this bearing into place, and push it down till it's seated. Okay, lower this in place, and then pull the assembly through. You don't have to worry about where the dog bone's positioned, because you can pull it out and get it back in. Make sure that it's fully through, and that this hole here is protruding. Okay, slide this bearing into place. There's no point in putting it in ahead of time, because if you press it in here, chances are you'll just push it right back out as you slide the shaft through. Okay, put this hex in place, and then get this pin started. Okay, and once the pin is all the way through and flat to either side, you're going to take this large grub screw. That's the M5x4. Oops, wrong wrench. And then at this point, just take a good old crescent wrench and put it over the hex. And I would do it where the pin is. That way you're sure to keep the pin centered, that it's not protruding from one side or the other. And then tighten this grub screw down. And what the grub screw is doing is it is pressing against this pin, pressing it back and keeping it from sliding out left or right on you and dropping. So that's a very nice system. I like the way they did that. I've had kits before where that you have a pin like that, and you've got to put the wheel over it, and you pop the wheel off and the pin drops out, or you're trying to get the wheel seated and the pin drops out, and it's a bit of a wrestling match to get that wheel on and off without losing the pin. And this way that pin is always in place, it's Loctite. So if you take a wheel off, you don't have to worry about catching a pin and making sure it's you know, where you need it. And my dust boot just fell off, so I need to take this back apart. And I had trouble with that on the other side too. Getting the dust boot under that black plastic cap is difficult. And I wish for things like that that they gave a little bit of instruction. Press that pin out. Pull this assembly. Okay, so now I need to figure out how to get that dust boot, to get the edge to underneath that black cap. Because if the cap doesn't hold it down, it's not going to stay where you need it. It's going to keep coming off. Trying, like with my fingernail, to kind of guide the rubber under the edge of the cap, compressing it. I got it part way. That is determined to be difficult. Let's try doing it this way. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video. I'm gonna try a few things. So I got one of them correct, and I pulled off the other one, which I realized hadn't stayed seated correctly. So what I did that worked for me was to get it over the lip, the seal, get the seal over the lip, sorry. Okay, and then, so you should be able to see the pin and the holes. You just want it one level over the lip, and then kind of slowly rotate this plastic ring and use my fingernails to kind of tuck the edge under without pushing the plastic ring in too far, and just kind of be patient and work at it, and a little bit at a time, and finally I was able to get it. So it takes some trial and error. Sorry, I was working off camera there. Okay. So basically you want to have it look like this. Okay. Damn it, I'm sorry, this is hard to do. Okay. So then you gotta take this plastic ring, and as I said, you kind of gotta give it a, you gotta kind of twist it a little bit and slowly use one fingernail pressing down on the rubber gasket. It took me about 10 minutes to get one of them right, and multiple failures along the way where I had to pull the plastic ring back out and try again. Okay, so that is how it should look if it's done correct and it's fully seated. So now I can insert this axle stub into the bearing. Sometimes it's easier to do the bearing first. I mean, to do the bearing on here and then slide the bearing and the axle into place. Like that. Okay, so now that's holding the plastic ring. And now I can slide this in, seat the bearing into the upright. I know you're not seeing this, sorry. Trying to film this stuff is very difficult. Okay, so you know that you've got things going correctly when you can see about 1/8 of an inch, about 2 or 3 millimeters of space between the hole and the edge of the upright. Okay, so now you don't have to worry about tensioning anything. Just put your crescent wrench on here to keep that pin from moving. Put your grub screw on the end of your wrench. And tighten it down. Okay, now I would make that snug, the grub screw, but don't over tighten it, because if you tighten it too hard, too far, you could deform the pin. At the very least, you could score it up, and if you deform it too much, you may not be able to get it out without having to like hammer it out with a, you know, some type of a, you know, a nail or a wrench or a pin or something to push it back out. So just keep that in mind. You want it tight, but you don't want it over tight. So we have completed 13, 1, and 2. And now it's time to go on to 14, 1, and 2. And that is going to be building up these linkages for the left and the right side, mounting the ball sockets for them, and snapping them into place. So I will be, I'll go ahead and just assemble those. I don't think it's productive for me to sit here on camera showing you how to do that. It's fairly self-explanatory. I have a nice TLR wrench here that has the right size. It's a 5mm, and you're just gonna hold this and get these started and thread them on, and then you're gonna measure. You've got one straight, one angled. The angle here is to undoubtedly provide clearance for the wheel and the inner rim surface so it doesn't rub against this. So I will put those together, and then I will come back and show you them being attached. Okay, I was just reviewing things, and I always kind of go back to things to make sure I didn't forget anything, go through the various parts, and I left these two very thin washers off. They go in between the hex and the outer bearing on the upright, so I'm going to go ahead and just take care of that right away. Fortunately, it's a quick thing. I'll just push the pin out. And as long as I am doing that, I'm going to put teeny bit of grease on this, as it's a moving surface, and just gonna put a little bit on my fingers and smooth it around on both sides. It's just a thin film. Pin back in. Screw the grub screw in. And now do the other side. Since I just showed you one side, I'm not gonna bore you with putting on the same washer twice, so I'll just go ahead and do that off camera. So after that, I'm back onto those control rods. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like and please subscribe to my channel.